All right, everyone. Hello and welcome. It is Tuesday, April 10th, and we have returned back from our spring break, and hopefully you had a good break, at least from Full Sail overall. I'm sure life continued on as normal, but at least we had everything not due after the first week, and your assignments were turned in on Sunday night. So we have our first round of submissions, and we are going to start out our session today by taking a listen to those submissions. I have four student submissions here. Each person has their own individual track with their submission, their composition from 2D Platformer. So I will talk about the assignment as a whole, kind of the things that we are listening for, and then we'll go through each one of these individually and just talk about what works and what doesn't, and things to watch out for. And I highly encourage everybody, certainly after seeing this first round, that you submit in the future, and we can include your submission here, because I certainly feel it is good and relevant for the individual seeing their own project, and I talk through it and give feedback in kind of this video format. But I also think it's great for everybody else. It's equally as valuable to see everybody else's submissions. So we got four different variations here, four different approaches to the same project. You'll see what works, what doesn't work. You will hear things that you probably wouldn't even considered. So definitely it's always positive for everyone involved, and even those that didn't submit. But hopefully after this round, you can certainly see the benefit of it, sharing your music, and gives us an opportunity to discuss different aspects about it. So this Tuesday session will be like all of our subsequent ones, the ones for the rest of the month, where we will talk about the previous week's assignments and then get into the new assignments for week 2 here for each week. So after our discussion of these 2D platformer compositions, we will move into an overview of your new assignment for week 2. Hopefully you've taken the opportunity to go on FSO and download the assignment for week 2. Actually, it was available all the way through spring break, so you had definitely enough time to at least download it and check it out, maybe play the game a couple of times, get a plan for the composition, and of course here we'll talk about it in detail. So that is our plan for this afternoon. Let's go ahead and start by discussing the composition, 2D platformer project as a whole. So as you see, each student has their own individual submission and their own track that has their 9 files on it that represents their particular 2D composition. Over here in this column, these are all of the main loops. You can see that these are longer overall. There should be 8-bar loops. These in the middle are the intros. These are 2-bar intros. And over here at the this is the endings. And they are meant to resolve or end the composition. And they're only in this kind of order here because of alphabetically, that's how they import. So we will start with the main loops over here. Main loops will make up the majority of your composition. It is what is going to be heard most often and most consistently while the player is playing the game. Main loops are meant to loop. They should have no pops or clicks or gaps in the file. You want to make sure that when you reach the end of a file, it can seamlessly loop and transition back to the front of that file. And the game is going to be able to jump around to these different main loops in any sort of order to create as much random and variation in the composition or in the playback of it as possible. So the real challenge here is that you had to make sure that all three of these files could be played in any sort of order. Whenever you reach the end of a particular main loop, it has to be able to jump back to the beginning of any one of the three any of the three main loops. We're listening for consistency. We want to make sure that there's a consistent mix across all three files. Nothing sticks out, nothing gets buried in the mix. There aren't wild changes up or down in volume of the whole mix or a particular instrument. So just consistency all the way across. Same thing with instrumentation. It needs to feel like the same band is playing the same composition across all three. There should not be three different compositions. They represent one cohesive piece of music that has three variations. So consistency in the mix, consistency in instrumentation, probably the key and the tempo and the time signature, those kind of basic properties of your composition, those should be consistent because it will probably, if they weren't, it would wildly jump around like you were just quickly switching between three different songs. So we want to make the transitions and switching from one cue to the next as invisible as possible in the background. Three intros. These three intros, each one of them are 2-bar loops. They are meant to build up into the main loops. They need to rise in intensity so that when they transition into the main loops, that they match wherever the beginning of, at the beginning of a particular main loop. Your instrumentation, your intensity, where you are at musically, you need to make sure that the endings of these intros match the beginnings of each one of the main loops so that it transitions seamlessly. It's definitely important to understand that intro 1 does not always go to main loop 1, which doesn't always go to ending 1. So you have to make sure that intro 1 works with all three of the main loops, and all three of the main loops work with all three of the endings. And in different in any combination, they are going to work. So the intros need to build up. They need to go all the way to the end of the file so that they are going to butt up directly next to the main loops. Typically, this sort of shape works well with the intros on these three files, where they start out lower in intensity and build up. Either more instrumentation is added or just more velocity is put into it as it rises and builds towards the main loop. So it's meant to start everything up. Certainly we got to listen to everything, but sometimes things like this that are just kind of constant all the way across, you want to make sure that you don't want it to sound like a 2-bar loop. A proper intro would rise and rise and rise, and then if it looped around, it would fall back down, and then rise and fall back down, because it's kind of a one-way direction. A loop should feel like a consistent piece of music that, as it reaches the end, it can transition back to the top without much change in intensity and just the structure compositionally. Also, watch out for gaps in the end of the files. Again, we have to listen to it. Just looking at the waveforms doesn't completely tell you everything. Sometimes, if it's just a straight up gap in the end of the file, then that's going to be bad. It's going to interrupt the flow of the music. Sometimes you get one of these gaps represents a rest or something like that. So that would certainly be okay if it's musically or purposely set up that way. But you want to make sure that they transition as seamlessly as possible into the main loops. And the endings, main thing is the endings need to end. They need to resolve the music. They need to finish the composition. They need to basically put a period at the end of the sentence and take all of the energy and the movement that happened in the main loops and resolve it to a finale and finish out the musical idea. So they should end. Number one, they shouldn't get cut off. These three look like they might get cut off at the end. The rest of them look like they do end properly. You want to make sure, you don't want to just like stop. You want to have some sort of musical ending to it. So you're going to take the drums. The drums will probably result like do a fill to a roll or something like that to a final crash. The chords will probably return back to the tonic. The melody will hit its last kind of final note, and everything will end. You'll hopefully have enough time for instruments to fade out and decay, and you just don't want the ends of the files to cut off the music. So that's mainly what we're looking for. Compositionally, we're looking for consistency, that it feels like that you should have the same instrumentation. Drums, bass, harmony, melody from the intros through the main loops into the endings. Sometimes I'll get instruments that are just missing in an intro or ending, and the drums will just cut off very quickly and suddenly. So watch out for big changes like that. And then it's also about transitioning and how smoothly or seamlessly you can get from one piece of music to the next. All right, so let's go ahead and start listening to the start listening to the first one here. Highlight those, unmute that. All right, let's see what this sounds like. So good progression. Good melodic development. I think maybe the mix, everything feels a little bit far off and maybe buried in reverb. There could be a bit more clarity to the mix. And let's see. Let me go back to the first one here and just listen to this for a bit. All right, so I like the climbing progression. There does seem to be some dissonant notes. Right, so everything's very major until you hit notes like that, or the combination of the note and the chord that is hit there. There's a minor chord, I think it's this one. Right here? Or right. I would say the second one's missing a melody. You got the kind of climbing chords there. But these two, there's like a synth that's at a higher octave that works as a lead line that seems to be missing in that middle one. Let's check this one out. There's that kind of dissonance in one of those chord changes. So I don't hear any dissonance in the second one, so just maybe clean up the first one and the third one. I might also change. Let's see, are they drums changing? Yeah, they are. Never mind. Drums do change. Okay, so there's good consistency. Everything loops properly. Everything's is formatted correctly, so it should all work in the game. Just a couple of tweaks there compositionally. Here in the intros, actually here in the chat, by hearing this, I don't think the intro is long enough. I think I did only 2 bars like it said in the directions. Yes, intros need to be 2 bars, so that is correct. As we listen to these, we'll probably find that all of these are going to be 2 bars. Intros and endings are 2 bars. Main loops are 8 bars. All right, here are 3 intros. I think that, oops, come on, logic. There we go. I think that maybe the third one has the most build up to it. 1 and 2 sound more like 2-bar loops. So, hello, logic. There you go. Like I could kind of sit here on this phrase, and it sort of makes sense. But it doesn't really have like a rise to it. These two, the third one has got a little bit more with the arpeggio going up. Just kind of following the chord tones helps to rise a little bit. I think some of it is also the percussion. Use the percussion instead of just having a 2-bar loop. Use it to actually add a fill or a roll in the last bar to kind of create that build. These look correct. Let's check these out. Cool. So they definitely end. Well, let me see here. I think there might be a little bit of tail that gets cut off at the end of these. Yeah, it gets cut off. It's still decaying and fading, so you want to just put a fade on that to make sure it reaches silence before it gets cut off by the end of the file. There's one bad note or chord, that last, or second to last chord. The other thing I might change each one so they don't have the same sort of form. 2, 3, 4. I mean, you basically hit a chord, and then you will that last chord sustains, and you have the acoustic guitar and the drums play in the second bar there. So I would probably end it on bar 1, beat 1 of bar 2, sorry. So it goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 2. And just kind of hold that 2. You don't need the extra strumming from what sounds like, what is it, strumming guitar or whatever it is in Contact. So you don't need the last couple of strums there, the last couple of drum hits in each one of them. Just kind of hit that last chord and sustain. All right, so good stuff there. Good things to talk about to begin. Let's go ahead and check out the next one. Here in the chat, is there any way you can check out mine? Yes. I'll get to the end and I'll go download it and add it in. Okay, so the main thing that I see here would probably be that the waveforms of these two look more consistent or look more similar to each other than this one. So we'll listen to see what's different between those. But other than that, let's go ahead and check this out. So, I think the main volume difference maybe is the tuba? I don't know. It just it doesn't really sound like a very big difference in the mix, but waveform certainly looks like it might just be a level thing. Okay, so the first one here, I would say that the mix kind of sounds thin. You got the drums, you've got the brass line, and the piano and the organ. Watch out for hard panning. I think the piano is only in the left channel and the organ is only in the right channel. Drums are mixed way low overall. So you don't, especially in a game, you want to watch out for hard panning anything, because you're not sure if somebody's going to be playing it on their TV or out of their smartphone or off of a big 5.1 surround system. Depends on the game. But you want to watch out for things that are just panned in one channel. So we could probably bring up the percussion to increase the intensity of the mix, the pacing overall. There's a good groove going on in the third one here. Probably because of the staccato brass instead of the sustain kind of gives that more bounce to it overall. I would definitely turn down the piano. Piano seems quite loud, probably because it's at a higher frequency overall. And maybe just work on the melodic development, and stay away from kind of repeating phrases, and use the entire 8 bars to develop the idea. All right, let's do 3 intros. These two sound the same. This one just sounds a lot louder. Let's see. Yeah. 1 and 3 sound too similar to each other. Watch the volume. Like this is way louder than this one, certainly. I like this one as an intro because you got the snare kind of building through there. Could definitely increase in volume. You can also see the difference in the left channel and the right channel. So again, watch out for the hard panned instruments. And let's see, 3 endings. Cool. That works. Yep. Yeah, those work. The only thing would be that cymbal. You got use one of those cymbals that just kind of goes on forever. Come on. Let's see if we can hear it here. So even though it doesn't look like much in here, there's still some audio going on. So just, I mean, you can do this and bounce the file out again. Oops, where's my fade tool? Nope, where's my fade tool? This one. Nope. And just have a fade out on it so it reaches silence before the end. Yep. Endings work well. Intros, watch the level difference and make sure that you didn't just repeat bounce the first and the third one. And yeah, just some mix changes, develop the melody a little bit more through the main loops. But again, the basic formatting of everything, the looping everything works. Probably just the biggest technical issue is the level mix. All right, let's do another one here. I'm interested to see what this little pause is. Yeah. Watch out for the mix if everything's, it depends on if it's like limited or whatnot, but you don't want to flatten out the dynamics of the mix too much. I love the little banjo phrases at the end. Yeah, not too much to complain about on this one. It's working very well. Bum, 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 bum. Yeah, compositionally, there's a lot of bounce to it. There's a lot of movement, a good pace overall. So the only thing that I typically warn against these little turnarounds like this. Bum, bum, bum. And that's often I warn against those when they're like drum fills. But these things are so short and just like kind of tag into the next piece of music that I don't know that it really would be a concern on this one. Yeah, I think nice work. Everything, again, fits and formats well and has a nice bit of energy to it. And where there would be gaps before, I'm going to guess that those are the little kind of rests and phrases. So let's do 3 intros. I think that this gap, when there's so many fun of these little phrases in the middle, I think it just kind of missing out on the second one. It's just like I just kind of forgot to say something here. This is the kind of music that needs like slide whistles and kazoos and things like that in the middle of these just kind of random silly phrases in there because it works so well with the against the music or against the game. So, but yeah, they definitely build up. Hey. Bank. I don't even. Is that just like a low bass, low banjo note? Yep. Cool. And 3 endings. Oh, let's do. Oops. Getting ahead of myself. So I definitely would include the drums. This is one of those things where you got the drums in the intros, I believe, right? Yeah. So they're everywhere except for the endings. So it feels like the drummer quit right at the end. So include those in there. You just use the drums for the first bar of the 2-bar phrase, and then end it like everything else does here. This second one might just feel like it ends a little too soon. But compositionally, instrumentation, everything fits very well. Everything loops. Yeah, I think you did a great job there. Fits the type of game. Yeah, so that is definitely a direction we're headed. Just a couple of little tweaks. Always a couple of things to tidy up overall, but nice work. All right, so let's check out the third one here. The only thing that concerns me, just looking at it, is the right channel of the second loop. That's one that looks like, again, that something's hard panned over there. All right, let's try this one. All right, so great groove. This will work well with the energy of the game. I often find like things that are more staccato like this, that are just kind of much more have little tiny gaps in between, help the sound effects to come out. Kind of leaves little holes in the mix overall, and you can still kind of feel that groove. So main things I would tweak would be, I hear we got a good rhythm, we've got the cool bass line, and we got one organ in there. I was basically waiting for more. Well, I guess you could throw some harmony in there. The bass line and the harmony and the groove of it kind of are really close together, but it really would like a strong melody. It really feels like it's missing the melody, and I was waiting for it, and then I heard the organ, and I thought the organ was going to be that, but then it was just like one little phrase right here. Yeah, one little phrase in that one section in all three of them. So it doesn't have to be the organ. Oh, I guess it's twice. Doesn't have to be the organ, but definitely add a melodic lead. And I'd actually say that the organ sounds a bit, I mean, those little phrases, those almost like little samples of it could work. But if you were going to use it as a lead line, I'd actually go for more of a synth, because the rest of everything is very electronic. So things to consider. Definitely, like I said, watch out for the hard panning. The fact that the beat is only in the right side would definitely cause issues. I think it's only in the right side. Yeah, there's some hi-hat over on the left side, but oh, come on, go back to 0. There we go. So, yeah, again, mix and melody would probably be the main things there. Let's listen to 3 intros. Cool. Whatever that was in intro 3, that should be your lead sound. It might even just be the bass line a couple octaves up or whatever it is. But that's the kind of thing that should be lead. Yeah, lead-esque, whatever. So I do like these builds. They're a little bit unrelated to what you're going to hear in the main loops. So you might mix some of that stuff, which you have, I think, in some of them. Like this one has some of that stuff. And so all these kind of like white noise sweep ups and all that stuff work really well. I would think that the last thing it's missing is drums somewhere in there, because I got a little bit of a hint of what that groove is, and then you drop this like strong groove right here. So use some of these drums in like the second bar of these, and make sure they will transition smoothly. Watch out for this gap at the end. That's not gonna. It should be boom, and kind of just hit right at the end there. I think this one's okay. Let's do this. 1, 2, 3, 4. 2, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, that'll probably work. This definitely would work. 2, 4. 2, 2, 3, 4. Yep. There you go. And then these, the main thing again would be that they end. Watch out for whatever this gap is on the third one. So there's little kind of drum effects in the second half work, but it's kind of sparse in the first half, especially this one, where you're coming off of that strong, again, you're somewhere in the middle of this strong groove over here, or one of these, and then all of a sudden it's just going to cut off suddenly and go into this. So start from the beginning with the drums, and then make sure it tails out and ends. It's almost like you just flop these two, so that you have room to end everything out. I would also do the same kind of white noise sweeps. I think you kind of got one here somewhere. Again, it kind of helps kind of close everything down and end the song. Very cool. All right, so let me go get the other one here. Hold on for just a moment while I get things underway here. Go find. Oops. There we go. There we go. All right. So we're going to get one more here. Switch back over to Logic and Williams. Let's see. Online, week 1, composition, Williams. Yes. Oh wait, you want me to get the second one, not the first one. I think this is the right one. Create a new track. And take these files, bring them in here. Place files on one track. Yes. That's quite all right. That's a good feeling. That's how it should be. But let's see. So since you're here, I'm going to ask you questions. How did you have any challenges? Okay. Excellent. Okay. So let's see here. Everybody else is muted. All right, let's check these out. Okay, cool. So I definitely like what's going on. Instrumentation. I would say that yeah, they're half as long as they need to be. So they feel like 4 bars. Let's do this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 2, 3, 4, 3, 2, 3, 4, 4, 2. Yep. So those stop logic. Stop. Those feel you. There could definitely be a discussion on this being 8 bars because of the double time kind of feel. But I feel that since these two are at the consistent tempo, this kind of feels double of those. So these would be the main tempo. So just extend all 3 of those out. What you're actually doing in there is great. Works very well. So I hear drums, bass line, organ, a kind of a portamento, kind of a gliding lead line in there. Is there anything else I'm missing? It sounds cool. So yeah, just take your progression and don't double it up, but just change a chord here or there, or and extend it out for the second 4 bars. Yep. Got good melodic development, a good groove there. That portamento synth in there that's moving around, that one's a little too loud in this third one. Are you using like a compressor or a limiter on the mix? Yeah, so it's kind of pushing it too much and it kind of squashes down the other instruments. So, and then watch out for, I think these all loop except for the first one. It has this little tiny fade out. So when it loops around, you get a little hiccup. Yeah, and actually this second one has a little tiny gap at the beginning, and this one has a little tiny gap at the beginning. So what I end up doing is, if you go up here in the marquee, I use auto set locators, or you can just hit U on your keyboard. But notice the little yellow bar, whenever I select something, it automatically moves it to the edges. So it'll make perfect loops that way, or it'll make your loops a whole lot more seamless. So let's check out these. Cool. I would say intro 1 feels more like an ending because it resolves back to the tonic. More than likely, you are going to you are starting the 3 main loops on the tonic, so it'll kind of resolve back to that same chord twice as it goes from the intro into the main loop. So so maybe kind of move in a much more kind of upwards direction melodically or compositionally, which I think you do in the second 2. Oh, the main thing that I heard with this one is that kind of swing feel to it. Might, since you're so like on the beat on everything else and it's got such a straight ahead rhythm, that going from that swing intro into one of those might cause a little inconsistency in the rhythm. But that's really like later on when we put it into the game in week 3, you might determine that then. You might put it in and it sounds like just fine. So, but that might be something to consider. There you go. That one works. I was almost thinking in the first bar that it was going to sound like an ending because you're kind of going down, but at the very end, you kind of rise back up to that final chord before it's going to drop back to the tonic. Yep. So 2 and 3 work. 2 might be questionable with rhythm, but I think intro 1 feels too much like an ending. So let's see these 3 endings. Cool. I think 2 and 3 end more clearly than the first one. Like it needs that last tonic chord to end everything out, which you do here. Yep. Yeah. So, yep. 1, 2, 3, 4. Yep. Yes. So those will work. And more than likely, see, it's because of this sort of you do the double time feel through all 3 of these. So that would be the only reason. Like if you did everything in this rhythm or this pace, then these would count as 8 bars, and these would count as 2 bars. And you'd be all right. But, I mean... So, I would maintain your intros and your endings and just extend out the main loops. Yeah. So that's what I'm hearing. Now, watch out for the little gaps because they'll be noticeable when you put them into the game. They might not be too noticeable when you're just playing everything back in Logic. But the other thing you should do, and I point this out towards the end of the month, is take like intro 1, main loop 2, and ending 3, and put them back to each other. I can actually zoom in and line them all up. And you want to watch out for any of these little gaps that occur. Something like... So then you can actually hear how they transition together. So those would be the things that I would pay attention to there. A couple of tweaks. Any other questions? Oh, no. See, these are pass-fail submissions. So I'm more interested in you having content for the game and having your music, having your sound effects, putting it into Wise. I give everybody, you have the opportunity to revise everything all the way up until the end of the month. I'm most interested in the final product by the end of the month. And I understand that most people working on these projects is the first time they've probably worked on a game soundtrack and like having to have this switch and move all around. And most, I didn't say this earlier, but even with all of these submissions, it's not really so much about the composition. Like the things that I'm pointing out are often the game-centric kinds of ideas. Like, how does this transition from intros to main loops to endings? What happens when it goes from the first version to the second version to the third version. It's not like there wouldn't necessarily be the same challenges if it was just okay, write a 2-minute long piece of music that goes with this video or this game. But the fact that it has to interact and loop and switch around and do all that stuff, I don't expect everybody to knock it out of the park the first time every single time. And it's much more of a revision. So I kind of consider this as a first draft, where it's like, okay, I give you the assignment, you take a pass at it, and we go, okay, this works, this doesn't work, tweak these things, and you can go back through the rest of the month and revise any of these changes. And then it's really all about that kind of final portfolio piece at the end of the month. So yeah, by no means is this going to hurt your grade. And I'm more focused, especially towards the end of the whole degree program and in your kind of final weeks and months. Just really focused on getting the best demo project out there and just working on it and revising it all the way up until the end. So. I mean, the sooner the better. But it's not going either one of those. I wouldn't do it. It's not going to affect your grade. Either one. Like it's 100 or a 0, and so you can send me the revisions and I can discuss those individually. But it's won't pertain to your grade. Let's put it that way. This week. So I will be, I don't know. Let's see. Wednesday, Thursday is probably while I'll be going through these. No. It's 100 or a 0. So you're getting 100. That's the way that I mean. It's a pass fail kind of on these first draft compositions. So what's he gonna do to me? What's he gonna say? Right. I can understand that. And I mean, yeah, it's the same. It's like, it's the first time that I've assigned a project to you. It's the first time that you've given a composition back to me that you know what's going through his brain. Right. So, yeah, it's more about you generating the content and us talking about it back and forth, and like it is going to be in the real world. I mean, you're not but 5 weeks or so in the real world. Nobody's going to give you grades, and they're going to say yes or no to it overall, and just keep working on it until you get it, and that sort of thing. So that's very good. I definitely encourage that. So okay, well, that's excellent. Let me go ahead and I'm going to discuss now the material for week 3. Any other questions? All right, excellent. Let me go ahead and get started on that. Hold on just a sec here. All right. So let me do this. Let me go. Oops. Let me go and go on to FSO. And we're going to start talking about week 2. That's great. I want preview. Preview. Week 2. There we go. Hello. All right. There we go. Actually, one more thing. Get my folder filled with all the material that I need. Class Campus Week 2. Week 2. Okay. All right. Let's go ahead and discuss the new assignments for Week 2. So we have a new project. We have a new game. We have a new soundtrack. A new style of game requires a new approach to the music. And so our game this week is called Angry Bots, and it is a demo that is provided by Unity Games. Again, this game is built in the Unity game engine. Next week, in week 3, we'll start talking more about the technology, and we'll discuss game engines and audio middleware and some of the software and tools that are kind of running all of this stuff in the background. And like I've said before, saying like game engine is like saying DAW, kind of, sort of, not really, but sort of. Basically, in the same way that a DAW is the tool that you use to make music, a game engine is the tool that a game developer uses to make a game. And just in the same way that there's Logic and Pro Tools, and they give away free projects and like, here's some recorded music for you to check out and test out how our software works. They do the same thing with games. They can provide versions of the games that people can tear apart, and we can get in there with our music and sound effects. So our new game for this week is a different style of game, different approach to gameplay overall. In Angry Bots here, you are this mercenary infiltrating a robot factory. The robots are none too happy that you're there, and they are bent on your destruction, so they will come after you. And your job is to kind of go further and further into the game world. This is a much more complete game. There is more stuff going on. Let's see here. Where am I? More stuff going on than 2D platformer, or more like there's like a beginning, a middle, and an end. Where 2D platformer, the score would just go up and up and up. This one, there is like an ending to it. You can actually beat the level. It's not a full game. It's just like one level of what would be a much larger game. But it takes about 5 or 10 minutes to complete the first time. And this one is kind of a much more futuristic, techie designed world. Lots of kind of sci-fi influences, robots and explosions and lasers and rocket launchers and sliding doors and technology and all sorts of interesting things for music and sound design. It's not probably an all ages, family friendly kind of game. Much more kind of dark and intense. And our main focus with the music is the idea of ambient and action, switching back and forth between lower intensity ambient music and higher intensity action music. And when I talk about ambient music, I don't really mean the style or genre of ambient music. Not like Brian Eno, Music for Airports, kind of just a slow drone that never changes, never does anything. Ambient just means less than action. Sometimes it's known as battle and exploration. But this is the idea of there's a period of time in the game where you're just kind of wandering around the level trying to figure out what's going on. And lots of games do this, where there's a period of time where you're exploring, and then all of a sudden an enemy jumps out and there's battle music. And the battle ensues for a particular period of time, and then you either win or lose the battle, and you move forward from that. So same sort of thing here. We have to, if you did nothing else in the game, if you just sat there in a corner and hid forever, you would hear this ambient piece of music. Ambient doesn't mean just a drone, just kind of slow and boring. It can have energy to it. It can have good instrument layers to it. It can have drums and bass and harmony, maybe even melody, but probably we'll leave that up for other pieces of music. But it can have structure to it. It can have development, and it really shouldn't just be one slow drone that doesn't do anything and just sits there. There would be an ambient piece of music until a battle happens. And when one of the battle happens, one of these robots comes out to attack. And you'll notice that the battles are pretty short, right? So this guy wakes up, he comes to attack, you only hit him a couple of times, and he explodes. This guy comes to attack, and I kind of toy around with him a little bit, run away, let him chase you. And eventually, you'll either destroy the bad guy or the robot, or they will destroy you. And whenever these battles happen, the action music comes in. And then when the battle is over, the action music will leave and return back to just the ambient music. The ambient layer or the ambient cue will always be there, will always be playing. And when you fight one of these robots, then the corresponding piece of action music will come in. There are 3 different types of robots, and each one of them has a different action cue or action theme that's attached to it. And whenever you battle that particular robot, you will hear its action theme. And then when you defeat that robot, that theme will eventually go away. It'll fade out. So you have an ambient cue, and then you have 3 action cues that represent each of the different robots. They can play at the same time and will play at the same time. So you will, no matter wherever you are in the game, you will always be hearing the ambient cue. Then one of these battles starts and the corresponding action cue comes in. So we have to understand, how do we add or subtract this action music whenever we want. That's one of the main challenges here. We have to be able to get into a higher intensity action piece of music and then return back to the ambient piece of music as seamlessly and invisibly as possible. So, how does the game know when a battle is happening? And the answer to that is it uses health points. It uses, you have health points, and the characters have health points. You might not notice, but this yellow bar on his back is actually a game meter or a health meter. And it tells you how long it takes. A lot to destroy you in the game, because it's mostly just to test out and have fun with it. And defeating one of these robots doesn't really take all that much time. So we'll have to discuss how we get back and forth between this lower intensity ambient music and higher intensity action music. Let me explain each one of the robots. The first one here is called the Buzzer Bot. This is the kind of flies around, is sort of annoying. It zaps you with these little lightning bolts. These guys are called the Spider Bots. They're basically bombs on legs. They come after you, and if they get close enough, you'll either destroy them, or if they get close enough, they'll self-destruct. They really don't do much except for chase you around and become annoying. These are the most frequent kind of robots on the map. There's another one over here. And let's go inside here. So, and then here is the third robot. This guy's called the Mech Bot. It's this big RoboCop-looking robot coming down the way here. These I would kind of consider like a mini boss. They're kind of harder to destroy. You have to unload into them to eventually defeat them. And then there's just the same robots across the rest of the map. The good thing with the music and sound is we really only have to focus. I mean, you really you see everything in the beginning of the level, and all of your music and sound effects will be populated through the rest of the game. So let's go ahead and bring up some of the other material. Let's see. Here's the PDF that you get. Shrink down. There you go. Okay. So here's the PDF you get. It discusses all sorts of different aspects of the composition of the project. You have action and ambient cues. Why do I keep turning away? There we go. You have action and ambient cues and a discussion of each one of those. How to play Angry Bots, hopefully, should be relatively straightforward, not too difficult to control. You can use the arrow keys to go up, down, left, and right. You can use the mouse to look around and then left click or just click on your trackpad to fire. There's a couple of listening tracks as reference. Different classic games in the style of this kind of sci-fi action game. Musical style. Here we're really looking and focusing on intensity. We want to make sure that whenever those robots come after you, that it's really powerful and strong and intense. You need to feel like the danger of these robots coming to attack. Nothing too chill, nothing too laid back. Sometimes I hear some music and it's like, hey, robots aren't so bad. Let's go ahead and have a cup of coffee or something like that. And they're like, yeah, sure, that's no problem. Which is not what you want. You want intense and strong and loud, and robots are chasing you around with lasers and missile launchers and all sorts of crazy sci-fi sort of stuff. So you want to match that aesthetic. On the other side of that is another thing that I get that is better, but it doesn't work too well, is like Robot Dance Party, where everything is like super hypey dance and not that dark or intense. It's like party time, and that doesn't necessarily work either. So intense and strong instrumentation. I have suggested instrumentation, synths and pads and driving bass lines, gated effects, sweeping filters, bouncing delays, fast percussion, heavy distorted guitars, big fast drums, large brass and strings, cymbal swells and impacts, anything that portrays strength and intensity. Then there's descriptions of each one of the cues, which is basically what I'm discussing now, and how they'll play back. What I really want to get to is the asset list down here. There's screenshots and descriptions of each one of the robots and how they should sound, and just a general overview. Then the asset list. There's a total of 7 files that you will create for this. I mentioned 4 of them so far: the ambient cue, buzzer action, spider action, and mech action. They're each going to be 1 to 2 minutes long, and they will loop 16-bit 44:1 stereo. So don't think about this as 4 individual 2-minute long compositions. Think about it as one composition that can be broken down into 4 parts or 4 stems. So each one of these layers is going to contain unique instrumentation. You shouldn't repeat any instruments between the different cues, so that when you hear those particular groupings of instruments or that thematic line or melody or instrument, whatever it is, you can recognize whatever robot's coming after you. You almost train the player with the music so that they can hear what's coming up next. So let me explain how these 4 files work, and then I'll get into these short stingers here. So when the game starts, if nothing else is going on, you are always hearing the ambient cue. Through the entire game, that 2-minute long ambient cue will be looping around and around. The ambient cue should be subtle. It shouldn't be too much in your face. It can still have a bit of rhythm to it. It doesn't need to have strong percussion, but it can maybe have some hi-hats or a arpeggiated bass line, or some sort of gated effect that will foreshadow the rhythm that's coming. And you should you want to lay down the foundation of the progression. This is going to map out how things are going to play back in the how all the layers are going to play back together. All right, so we hear the ambient from the beginning of the game. As soon as you've been attacked, You either shoot the robot or the robot shoots you, then the action music will come in. The action music will come in immediately. It will start playing from wherever it is in the loop, and you will hear action music. This point, you need the strong percussion. You probably need a couple of layers of percussion, bass line, harmony, and probably a thematic. I don't necessarily want to say instrument like a melody, but thematic thematic line or thematic instruments or something that tells you what robot is coming after you, so that you can give that sort of information and help the player. All right, so first guy, the battle starts, and as soon as he's destroyed, the battle ends. The music's going to start fading out at that point. Then these guys jump awake, the spider music will start, and as soon as they're destroyed, it'll stop playing and it'll fade out over time. So let's go ahead and load up some examples here. Talk my way through a couple of examples of what this might sound like. There we go. All right, so as stated before, you are going to have 4 2-minute, somewhere between 1 to 2 minute long cues or layers, or even maybe think of them as stems that can play back together and play at the same time. The biggest challenge here is going to be dissonance and clashing notes. You want to make sure that there's a lot of similarities between these cues. They need to all start at the same time. They need to end at the same time. They need to be in the same key, in the same tempo, and same time signature, and they need to all loop together. They need to follow a common chord progression, because even if they're in the same key, if they're all headed to different chords at the same time, it's going to probably not work so well. So you need to, with all of the things that are the same, key, tempo, time signature, looping, starting, stopping, the things that are going to be unique are your choice of instrumentation. Each cue should have unique instrumentation that's only found in that cue. You really shouldn't repeat any instrument lines. You shouldn't copy anything, because when the game puts it all back together, it's going to double things up. Like if you have the same drum pattern in multiple cues, when you play them all together, then that drum pattern is 4 times as loud as everything else. So make sure that you have unique instrumentation, and then a unique composition. Each cue should have certainly a strong rhythm. That's going to be the most of the action part. And then a thematic melodic line or thematic instrument or thematic phrase or something like that that helps identify whatever robot it is. Probably a bass line to help, although you don't need necessarily a bass in all 4 of them. A chord progression, but you don't also need to put all of the voicing of every single chord in each one of the cues, right? So you write your chord progression, you're going to have 3 or 4 voices per chord. Well, all 4 of these don't need to have all 4 voices every single time. Maybe one of them is just the root, follows the foundation. Another one, you've got the 3rd and the 5th. Maybe another one, you get the 1st and the 5th, if you've got 7ths in there. And you can start, if you write out the chord progression first, you have a basic common structure or skeleton to work from. So let's go ahead and check this out. Just get started here. Let's play. Start with the ambient cue. All right, I am going to we're going to play the part of the game, just mixing these up and down. And the whole reason this thing is going to work in the game is because when the game starts, all 4 of these pieces of music are going to start, and they're going to play together. They're going to reach the end and all loop together, so they're going to constantly be in sync. The only thing is, the player's only going to hear this first one at the beginning. The 3 others are going to be silent. Then the buzzer comes in. So let's do this. Game starts. Game starts, and you hear just the ambient cue. And then once you get attacked here, that's the buzzer bot, and so the buzzer music will immediately come in. And you're going to hear that buzzer music as long as the battle's going on. And then once you defeat that robot, it's going to start fading out. And the game is going to do this a whole lot better than I can and control it in the DAW. But it's going to fade that out. And whenever that robot attacks, that music comes in. So this is the buzzer by itself. So we've added the low strong strings. You got some big timpani hits in there, big low bass drums, and there's these little white noise sweeps somewhere, I think, in here. There you go. So it adds a little bit of layers. So this ambient cue is mainly made up of, has a hi-hat pattern in it, but mostly is a chord progression. This is outlining the chord progression. No, it's a couple of notes that are just kind of presenting the foundation of that chord progression. Here in the chat, it says, so that means we're making tracks separate, so that means the music can't clash. Yeah, you are probably best to think about it as one whole composition. So what I end up doing in my composition session is I'll set up a region just like this, like a particular length that depends on your tempo of your music, and you'll count out how many bars will fit, how many bars you want to use that will fit with between 1 to 2 minutes, and then just start adding instruments. I would often start out with a basic just piano, just start writing your chord progression, even though it's going to end up probably a very synthetic and very electronic and all that sort of stuff. Start out with a piano or a basic keyboard patch, write out your chord progression, maybe write a few melodies that could work with it, figure out what instruments you're going to use, and then just keep stacking them on top of each other so that it becomes one cohesive composition. But eventually they're going to be bounced out separate from each other so that the game can use them individually as it needs to. All right, so that is the buzzer. And once that buzzer is defeated, it eventually fades away, back to the ambient. And then you go after the next one. So this spider pops up. When that spider pops up, the music is going to immediately add in the spider cue. It sounds like this. Hi-hat, bass line, a little melodic line that we'll hear is actually a double of the mech cue. Here it is with the ambient. And then this guy's destroyed. This guy chases around a little bit. when that guy's gone, the music will fade out. Until you get after this guy. And this guy is the mech bot. And he comes and he attacks, and it sounds like this. So with that one, you've got strong brass and strings. You basically have the high strings to match the low strings from the buzzer cue. You've got a strong lead melody. This one, where's it coming? Right about here. And you also have the ability to have 2 or even all 3 robots on the screen at the same time. So we could bring in the buzzer cue. Bring in the spider cue. And all 4 of these cues should be able to play together. No clashing notes, no clashing rhythms. Again, think about it as one cohesive composition that with multiple layers that can play at the same time. There are 3 other files that are listed in the asset list. The music buzzer stinger, the spider stinger, and the mech stinger. And those are there to help the transitions from the ambient into the action. The action cues are going to hit quickly, and you do not know where they're going to be in the music. So to help this transition, we add in stingers. And stingers are going to play when the action cue is introduced. So let me give you an example here. I'm going to divide this up like how it will sound in the game. Just kind of set this up so everything is set up correctly. Something like that, something like this. And then we'll put fades. So we got a fade out there, and fade out there, and fade out there. All right, so when the buzzer action comes in, when it comes in here, you'll notice that the buzzer, it'll come in probably in the middle of some phrase somewhere, doesn't have a strong impact, just kind of jumps up. So, I was actually at the end of a sweep there. That's actually kind of luckier than it typically is. Turn off my fade there. Thank you. Let's play that again. So it just comes in there. And so to hide that sudden transition, we can throw stingers in here. And the game, again, the game's going to do this all for you. A stinger should hit have a strong impact at the front and fade out to silence very quickly. It's meant to distract and create a little bit of interest at that whatever the random point that's going to transition, provides a little bit of consistency, even though it is kind of just going to be a random point. If you're familiar with electronic music and like drops and impacts and things like that, that is commonly what a stinger could be. Stingers are typically have a strong impact, maybe some low end, maybe it could be a drop, and then there's another layer or two on top of what I call like some modulation or some filtering or a pitch drop or a sweep, filter sweep, or a synth arpeggiator or something like that. These are all kind of strong impacts. They should not be tonal. They should not be rhythmic, because since you don't know where they're going to be played, it might clash. So strong hit, lots of reverb, tails out to silence. There's another one. And like I said, they are there to cause a bit of distraction as you're going from one piece of music to the next. So here's what it might sound like when played against the action cues. And again, the game does all of this for you. You just have to create the material. So it should provide a hit, and then the one should fade out, and the other piece of music will already be there. Here's another one. And here's a third one. So hopefully that gives you a good idea of where to start with the composition. I'm going to play one more here. Let's get rid of that, and this, and this. All right, here's another ambient cue. So this would be a good example. This would be a good example to say that the ambient cue doesn't need to be boring. It doesn't need to not move or do any or have any changes to it. Here, you can hear the outline of the chord progression. You hear a arpeggiated phrase. You hear some percussion, but it's not like a kick, snare, hi-hat pattern. It is sporadic and meant to provide emphasis. Here is the buzzer cue. Here it is by itself. So it follows along, it's got a little melodic line to it. It's got drums, that's probably the most important thing to add for the action cue. Here's a spider. This one's mostly drum kit. Mostly drum kit, got a lot of crash cymbal in there. And here's the mech. Mech sounds cool, it almost sounds like an alarm going off. You definitely have to watch out when all four of these are playing to make sure it doesn't completely overload the master. But a common progression, a common pace, a common rhythm to it that allows each one of these layers to be added and subtracted at any point. Then the game, whenever a new idea comes into play, it can just fade in the corresponding piece of music as necessary. So hopefully that helps in describing how the composition is going to be set up. I do want to show off a couple of things with the sound effects for the sound design this week. Please let me know if you have any questions as we go along, or if you're just watching the archive, then you can send me a message if you need any sort of clarification. So that's the compositional side of things. You also have the sound design, creating sound effects for Angry Bots, 22 sound effects. Again, this is, like I said before, because it's a little futuristic and robots and weapons and things like that, explosions, there's a lot of fun opportunity for sound design. So let me just load up the sound effects. And I would suggest that you do something similar to last time, where you would load the original sound effects into Logic and use them as reference. So let's see, I'll close down this session. Don't save. Get a brand new session here. Now, when you go download this assignment, you are going to get a folder that looks like this. It's called Angry Bots Original Sound Effects. And it's going to, you unzip it, and it's going to have two folders. One is called To Replace, and the other one is called To Use. There's a total of 60 some odd sound effects in the game, and I don't require you to do all of them. You can use some of the original ones to supplement them. So the one that's called To Replace, these contain the 22 sound effects from the original, these do contain the original sound effects, but these are the ones that you will have to do for the assignment. And the reason is these are the more interesting sound designy kind of sounds, if that really makes any sense. They are the more obvious weapons and robot kind of sound effects. The ones to use, these are some ambiances and interior shots. Then there's like bullet impacts and ricochets, and then there's also footsteps. So you're probably not going to win any awards off of your footstep design. You're not going to get hired off of your ricochet. Well, who knows? Maybe you would. But more likely, this is a focus on the music and the and more important sound effects. So something to consider, but we definitely are going to do and replace the to replace. I include the other ones there because you can and are encouraged to do all of it, so that whenever you show this off, you can say, I did everything in this game. Otherwise, some of the original sound effects will be there still. But let's just use the To Replace folder. I'm going to take all of these sound effects and I'm going to drag them onto a track here in Logic. Open, place all the files on one track, yes. It always comes up with, actually this one doesn't. If it comes up and asks you if you need to change your sample rate, just change the sample rates of the files, that's fine. You're going to bounce them out anyway. All right, then once you have the original sound effects on here, you would probably spend some time, you'd probably clean this up a little bit. They don't need to be right on top of each other. So take these and separate them out a bit. Oh, that didn't work. Well, Logic, come on. You can cooperate with me. There we go. Do that. Do that. And you don't need to watch me do all of these. But just trust me, separate them out a little bit so that there's a little gap in there. So when you bounce everything, you have a little room. Then you would create a couple of blank tracks down below. And build all of your sound design directly below the original sounds. But listen to the sounds as reference for what they should sound like, how loud they should be, what's the shape or like the waveform look like, how loud is it, how long is it, just the basic properties of that file. And then you would build your own sound effects down below. I'm going to cheat here and just drag these down. You would not do this. Don't do this. This is a bad idea. But basically, if I were to fake it, these would be all of my effects. And you definitely mute out the originals when you bounce. You don't want the original files in there. They're really obvious to hear. And you have, then you'd bounce these out and you'd have your sound effect. And you'd go through and design all of these. Let me actually play these. I think this is going to work. Let's see if these broadcast. Airlock door close. That did not work. Hold on. How about this? Let's try that again. There it goes. Okay, this is airlock door close. There are a lot of doors in the game, and there are all the Star Trek kind of doors that open and slide open and close and do all that stuff. So there's a door open. There's a door close, and the assignment has pictures of everything, so you can play through the game. You can see what's what. A lot of times you can get away with the close just being the reverse of the open. Maybe there's a little like chunk, like ka-chunk at the end as it locks closed. But with these, you can use with hydraulics, pneumatics, servos, motors, those kind of things give you those kind of great mechanical sounds. Ambience, exterior rain. It's a rain loop. 30 seconds. Yours doesn't have to be that long, but just a consistent rain clip that you'll hear when you're outside of the robot factory. Interior hum. This is when you go in. This is like room tone. I always think that sounds like the inside of a spaceship or something. Like, as if I knew what the inside of a spaceship sounded like, but I'm sure. Something like that. Flying buzzer destroyed. There's a lot of sound effect. There's a lot of explosions. So the two main things in the game are, not main things, but things that have a lot of sounds are doors, opening and closing, and explosions. So what I would suggest that you do when you go do the sound design is you should be familiar with like the Westar Music Library to get access to sound effects there. There's another resource called freesound.org, which is a website. It's kind of a community-driven website. Westar is great because it has a whole bunch. It has the Sound Ideas Library, which is a great, like, very high-quality sound effects library. Freesound.org is community-driven. There are lots and lots of sound effects on there. There's also lots and lots of very bad sound effects that are not worth anything. But there's also some very good stuff in there. And for the types of things you're trying to do, a lot of that stuff can be covered there also. So what I would do is say, okay, I need explosions. So go off and search for a whole bunch of explosions, bring them back in, and then combine them all together to make the sounds that you need. Don't work on one sound at a time. Don't say, I need a flying buzzer explosion. Go find an explosion, bring it back, edit it, name it, bounce it. Then go, oh, I need a mech explosion. Then go back out, get another file, bring it back in, edit, name it, format. Like, that takes too long to go back around and around and around like that. Do it in chunks. A lot of times when I do sound design, I'll spend one day just looking through sounds. Like, just go find my library of whatever it is, and I'll just go, here's 25 sounds that I'll eventually put all together. Then maybe the same day or maybe the next day, I'll go back and I'll just edit everything. Put them all together, layer them up, see what works. Then often, if there's time, I might have another day that's just like mixing and bouncing and formatting and delivery, like finalizing everything. So, so if you work in big chunks like that, it often makes the process a bit easier. This is Zap Electric. This is when the lightning bolt kind of shoots out and zaps you. Mech Alert. All of the robots have an alert sound when they recognize that you're there. They kind of wake up and attack. So there's kind of an alarm sound there. Mech Destroyed Explosion. It's an absolutely huge sounding explosion, which is good for that very large mech robot. These are patrol mech footsteps. As that thing is walking down the hallway, you will hear these footsteps for footstep 1, footstep 2. I think they completely cheated and used the same sounds. We could probably make it a little bit more interesting than that. Missile explosion. So this is when it fires at you. So it shoots its missiles at you, which is this shoot missile sound. So it fires them, and then it either hits you or hits a wall or something like that and explodes. The spider alert. Right? So a little couple of beeps as it wakes up. You don't have to do exactly the same thing. Just kind of do some other stuff. I've heard very cool things where people have done like vocoded robot voices when these things like wake up and it goes attack or something like that. Spider Destroyed Explosion. These are the bombs on the... That's when you destroy it. This is when it self-destructs. I think that is a horrible explosion sound. It's a real big letdown compared to the other explosions. Proximity. This is when the spider bots are coming after you. They beep. And it's very important. Just make that one little beep. And you don't want it to be very long, because what happens is as it gets closer to you, the beep gets faster and faster. It goes beep, 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 beep. And so if you have like a long sound, that's just going to stack up and sound all sorts of crazy. So all you really need is one really short sample. Spider self-destruct, that's the bad explosion. Interior doors open and close. These are the Star Trek doors that slide open and closed. I always think that sounds like somebody's window being rolled up or down. Locked door opening. Once you get, you stand next to these computer terminals and you hack the computers, and it allows these locked doors to open. Player death. This is when you die. That's not true. That's a gunshot. That is the incorrect sound. Let me get that out of there. Player hit. This is when you take damage. Player shooting. This is the gunshot sound. It's pretty important with that sound. That is going to be a looping sound. And it is important that you match the timing of those shots, because I think it matches the animation or the muzzle flash in the game, which is this. So this is player shooting. Oh, muted. Right, so that's just a loop going around and around. You would probably be best served 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. There's 12 in here. Just build your shots right below that and just use the same timing so that it creates this kind of smooth loop overall. And the last one is, I think it's the last one. Yeah, terminal hacked. Right, just some sort of electronic sound as the terminal is being hacked. I've heard people like typing on their computers, or sounds like a keyboard, or there's a voice in there that says terminal hacked. I don't know why a computer would tell you it's been hacked, but whatever. So that hopefully, again, will give you a good direction for your sound design. Always make sure that you mute out the original track. Don't include the original sound effects in there. Create 22 sound effects for Angry Bots. And I think that should be it. That's certainly quite enough from me for this afternoon. We did the peer review of the submissions, which was always great. Again, it hopefully encourages everybody to submit also for next round. And then we talked about your Angry Bots and your Angry Bots music and sound design. So if you have any questions, go ahead and post them up in the chat or send me a message. But other than that, let's go ahead and wrap it up there. And I'll see you again on Thursday. All right. Thank you very much.